Good morning. I'm Holly Magnuson, and this is Ask the Security Guy. I am here with Shawn Kohrman. Good morning, Shawn.
Morning, Holly. How are you?
Doing well. Thinking about a lot of different things, one of which is kind of a significant thing in our history. And we wanted to take a moment and recognize and acknowledge.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, you were, yeah. It was 75 years ago today, the attack on Pearl Harbor. And we just wanted to acknowledge and thank our veterans and those who still continue to fight for our country.
Yeah, and we certainly want to acknowledge our support and our sincere thanks for the sacrifices they make and have made on this day, especially.
So, hug a veteran if you know one. So, other things before we get started. Just as a reminder, you should see the chat window to the right of the video. If you have questions or comments for Shawn as we're going on, please feel free to type those in so that we can see them and answer them, talk about them. And we also want to talk about our computer refresh sale that happened this morning. For those of you who were trying to purchase one of our refreshed old computers, had a little issue. Shawn, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I got word this morning from the folks in charge of that, and I wanted to put a security guy spin on it for a second. I realized it was a huge customer service issue, and there were a lot of people very frustrated by that, and rightfully so. It was a hard thing and very disruptive and frustrating. From the security standpoint, I want to point out that what Shopify did in blocking or temporarily blocking some of these transactions was an attempt to protect cardholder data or individuals who are making the purchases. From their perspective, what they saw was a huge number of attempted purchases or purchases coming in from one place, APU, and it looked to them like an attack. So think about a common use case would be, a cyber gang has collected hundreds of thousands or thousands even of credit cards, and they decide to go Christmas shopping, that kind of thing. So I know our team is working with Shopify to remedy the issue. I believe they're going to be reaching back out to customers who had declined transactions. So I'm not sure right now what the game plan is, but please be patient with them. They're doing their very best, and the company that runs the website for us was doing what they felt was best in order to protect our customers. So.
Yeah, there's been so much, fraud with credit cards and, especially online transactions. They really were doing us a favor, even though it doesn't feel like it right now.
Yeah, it actually ties into one of my predictions from last year, where we were expecting to see a huge increase in online credit card fraud. And that's partially related to the chip and PIN rollout. Many of you have probably already gotten either a new credit card or a new bank card with a chip embedded in it. If you go to 7-Eleven or a variety of other vendors, they're asking you to use the chip instead of the swipe. So while that works really well in person and it helps with, to a degree, it helps with card copying, for instance. Online credit card fraud was what we expected to see a spike in. So the original prediction were that we would see close to double this year. The final data is still out, but from all appearances, we seem to be pretty close to on track. So what merchants are doing is they're really stepping up their monitoring, particularly around behavior monitoring. So they're going to be looking at where do you normally buy, when do you normally buy, and how much do you normally spend, and those kinds of things. But they're also going to be looking at the region where you're buying from. So, for instance, if you live here in Azusa, California, but you decide to take a trip to, I don't know, Utah, and you wind up doing all of your Christmas shopping there in one day on Amazon like I do, Um, what the merchant is going to see is all of a sudden there's a large volume of transactions taking place out of state from a place they've never seen you make purchases before. That sets off a red flag for them. Now, depending on the card company or the bank, they may call you and ask to verify that that's actually you buying stuff, or they may proactively temporarily shut down your card and then contact you. Different banks have different practices. I've had one of my credit cards, I was getting ready for a trip I'm planning to take soon, and it declined my transaction because it was an unusual amount. It was, a fairly expensive trip. It was unusual for me to be buying that because they hadn't seen that kind of history with me ever. So it was a quick phone call to them to let them know it was actually a valid thing, and problem solved. As inconvenient as that was, I mean, it cost me about an hour to go through that process. I would much rather go through that than the cleanup process of somebody getting a hold of my credit card and maxing it out with fraudulent purchases. So, if you go through this situation with your bank or with your credit card company, I encourage you to be a little patient, because what they're trying to do really is protect you.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate about Amazon, like this morning, I needed to purchase some things for my nephew. And so I went to Amazon, and then as soon as I marked it that I was shipping it to another address rather than my default address,
Right.
I had to re-enter my credit card information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wouldn't just use the file, card on file. It required me to enter it again. So
right.
Another safeguard to protect people, getting into my account, which if they get into my account, I'm going to be really impressed, since I have a really long password that's kept in LastPass. Plug for LastPass, which is now free, premium for everyone.
Hey, I love that.
Yes.
When did that roll out?
Right after they were bought out by Let Me In.
Gotcha. Good news.
So yes.
So now we don't have to scrape up the whole $12 a year?
Nope. That's my understanding, is you no longer have to scrape up your $12. That $12 can go to something else that you find in your couch. Or not the money that you find in your couch. Anyway, predictions, Shawn. Let's move on.
Okay. So getting back to our predictions, one of the things we talked about last year was the Internet of Things, and it being used or seeing a significant uptick in its use by bad actors to do bad things. Unfortunately, that came true. And we, this year, saw some of the largest attacks ever recorded, using at least either wholly or a large part of Internet of Things type devices, your DVR, a webcam, a home security system that has a connection out, a thermostat control. I mean, any number, if it's internet connected and it falls into that category of Internet of Things, it's a potential risk for this. To give an example, one of the there's actually a security researcher known as Krebs on Security. He was hit with an attack that was around 393 gigabit of traffic. Okay, to put that in context, that our internet connection for the whole campus is in the single digits in terms of gigabit bandwidth. What hit him was 393 gigabit per second of traffic. That wasn't even the biggest one. There was a hosting company that was taken out and put out of service for several days by traffic that crossed a terabyte worth of traffic per second. Okay, so the volumes of data that are being generated are incredibly huge. And they're being generated off of these little low power devices using standard tricks with the protocol to generate more traffic. One of the big ones is called a DNS reflection attack. And it's where I would ask a question of a server on the net, but the return address that I give is the server I'm attacking. So I keep sending all these requests, and the replies keep going to the person who never made the request in the first place, and they don't know what to do with it. Well, when you multiply that times several 100,000, it just clogs the pipe, and it brings things to a screeching halt. And that's one of the things these low-powered devices are really good at, because it's a standard thing for them to do that type of request. But because security, again, with Internet of Things, was an afterthought, or in some cases isn't even thought of at all still, they're vulnerable to this kind of thing. So, yeah, it's been an interesting year in that world.
Yeah, it's still, I still can't wrap my brain around how it all works, but someday maybe I will understand it and be able to speak to it a little better, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, the DNS reflection attack, think about if you sent a letter to a friend in Oklahoma, but you used the wrong address on purpose so that it would bounce. But the return address that you put was somebody else in Northern California that you didn't like. And let's say you sent thousands of these letters. Okay, all those bounces are going to start hitting the person you don't like in Northern California. It's that same concept.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Postal Service will have a field day with you.
Only if they find me. Which would, considering how my mail gets misdelivered, not a problem. So next prediction you want to talk about?
So this is kind of a weird one, and it can be somewhat politically or emotionally charged, depending on how you look at it. We talked about the idea of doxing or public shaming, where you basically you get someone's dirty laundry, whatever they've posted, they thought privately, and make it public for everyone. We saw a variance of this most spectacularly with the presidential election. We've heard of cases of fake news. There were just the internet and social media was just inundated with memes and photos that were dug out of the past and published for everyone to see. And it was an interesting year for that with the presidential election to see this highlighted in that way. Now, it's not uncommon for presidential candidates to have every part of their lives exposed. But the way it was done this year was interesting because of the heavy use of social media to promote one side or the other, or defame one side or the other, and the use of that platform for that purpose. So we're seeing an uptick there, but it's really that notion of using the social platform for shaming people for their beliefs, for their ideology, for their religion, for their political standing, for any number of reasons, is becoming more and more prevalent, and we're seeing an unfortunate uptick in that. So the next topic that we talked about was access as a service, and that is the idea where a company will have a server or several servers compromised, and then the attackers turn out and rent access to that so that you can use that platform to attack others or dig into that company itself, whichever you prefer. They don't care what you do with it. There's, the terms of use between in the black hat community are pretty light.
I say, you show me the money, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a free market economy. They don't really care. And since they don't really care about the law anyway, do the math. But we haven't seen official numbers yet, but my initial findings are that we're seeing a small uptick there, but fortunately not as bad as we expected.
Good news.
Yeah, a little bit of good news there. The downside is reporting for that kind of of attack, because there's, in most cases for that kind of attack, there's no mass records disclosure. So the laws that apply to different industries may not cover them reporting that publicly. So what we know about it through standard reporting mechanisms may not be accurate right now. So we're keeping an ear to the ground on the other side of the house and see what we hear. But I
So in
doubt
other
we're going
words,
to get official numbers on that.
yeah, I was saying, in other words, they don't want people to know that they got owned that way.
Pretty much, yeah. Any organization out there, they're not going to publicly disclose a breach unless they have to. And the only time they really have to, or they feel obligated to, because in some cases they will voluntarily if there's an exposure of customer data or employee data, and they will try to, in cases where it's focused in small groups, or if a small group was affected, they'll typically try to just do targeted communications rather than just a big public announcement. But even those become known as people talk and share and carry on. The next item that we wanted to touch base on was the replacement of the password, the holy grail for me. You know, how do we get rid of passwords? How, you know, as we talked about last year, this is still in development. We're still working on ways to replace the password. We're seeing exciting developments in one area in particular where we're talking about voice recognition. So it's different than speech recognition, where your phone would respond, or whatever device would respond to a phrase. What it's actually learning is your intonation, your inflection, your actual voice, the things that make your voice unique. Now, some of the points that they're working on dealing with right now is how do you prevent that, someone just recording my voice and then using that recording. So there are problems with the technology, and it's still very, very early on in its development. But that's one of the things. Another one is retinal scanners using your phone's camera. So that's another interesting development. Most security researchers right now are regarding that as nothing more than a novel gadget. But as time goes on, it could get some traction. So we also talked about cloud wars, the idea of bad actors harnessing cloud infrastructure to go after each other. So far, haven't seen really much evidence of that. Hoping it stays that way. But the risk is still a very real thing. And so we'll go after that. The one that, as I mentioned before, scares me the most, we're starting to see realities of, and that is cyber terrorism. In November of this year, the San Francisco MTA was taken down by a ransomware attack, and the entire system was offering free rides, as they put it, for it was a day or two until they got the system back under their control. So there's thousands and thousands of dollars, if not millions, lost in revenue. But it was the MTA. It's a type of infrastructure attack. It was public transportation. It was the control and ticketing system that was taken out. Now, there is kind of a silver lining to this. A security researcher got wind of it, started tracking back the attacker, and compromised his email accounts, and then started going after his Bitcoin wallets. And while he wasn't able to steal any money back, we were able to determine this particular hacker has made literally hundreds of thousands of dollars doing ransomware attacks against companies around the world, and apparently is making quite a good living at it. They're doing better than me by far. So there's the evidence to support it. They haven't been able to track him all the way back to a person yet. He's actually being pretty good about covering his tracks, and following the money is being challenged because he's using Bitcoin. Um, the other thing that comes into that context was there were also this year 3 major British hospitals that were taken down by a ransomware attack, and they were down for about 48 hours. But in that time, they had to cancel over 2,200 procedures, operations, etc. Now that's where it gets really scary, because what if you have to have a life-saving operation, and because the IT systems got compromised, you can't.
Don't even want to think about it.
That's where this stuff gets real. To make it, to bring it home, as we get into these areas, and we're seeing these attacks against, MTA and hospital infrastructure, the things we have to think about is what happens to gas, what happens to water, what happens to power, what happens to transportation networks, what happens if in New York City you took out all the traffic lights at once, turned everything to green. These things are possible, and that's so the scary thing is we're starting to see signs stepping towards this, and it's just something to be aware of at this point. So those are the major predictions that we had from last year. It was good to see a couple of them didn't pan out as badly as I was afraid of. Some were way beyond what I expected. The Internet of Things attacks were amazing. They were utterly amazing. Just the sheer volume. We've never seen anything like them.
Well, and their choice of targets with Krebs on security.
Well, yeah. Now, in all fairness, I mean, he does a lot of work that exposes him to this kind of thing. But even so, I mean, it was a pretty interesting attack. But the more interesting one was the hosting provider that was taken down, because that attack was light years beyond even the attack on Krebs Obscurity. That was a brand new record. And what we're seeing with that particular one is what we call a botnet, which is a collection of these compromised machines that is self-propagating. So every compromised host, so say your DVR gets taken over, you'll never notice, because the intent is not to take it down, the intent is to use it. So you aren't going to really know that it's doing something bad. But as soon as it gets compromised, its first order of business is to start scanning around it to find others like it and see if it can compromise them. So this bot network is growing exponentially right now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Defense against that type of thing, if you have those devices?
Make sure that you set a password on the device if it has the option to do so. A lot of them come with a default password installed. Change it. If you're setting it up at home, make sure it's not out there on the internet, that your home router is configured to protect those devices on the inside. Because the most common place where we see these types of things is where people misconfigure them and directly put them on the internet instead of behind the router. So it's just simple things.
Sounds good.
So.
Any other thoughts before we start winding things down?
Well, we are going into the holiday season. I know last month we talked about that some, but as you go about your shopping and those kinds of things, be aware of what's around you. If you're shopping in person, be alert. If when you're walking out to the parking lot, put the phone down, head up, look around, be aware of what's going on around you. If you're shopping online, as always, I recommend you use a low limit credit card that you don't have any emotional attachment to, and not your bank card. Mm-hmm. That way, if some type of compromise happens with the merchant, it's a lower impact to everyone involved. And then the last thing I want to talk about, there's a lot of malware or viruses or Trojans going around that can affect your computer and steal data from your computer. I want to make sure to remind our viewers to make sure that they have their antivirus up to date. Last, I think, we talked about Windows Defender versus real antivirus last month. Yes, I did go there.
Yes, keep going.
But make sure your virus is up to date. If you're using a paid one, make sure the subscription hasn't expired. If you're using a free one, just check on it real quick to make sure the last updated time is relatively current. Most of them update several times a day, so you should see today's date on there if you look for the last time it updated itself. And it's never a bad practice to run a scan on your computer and see if it's going to find something. So, but yeah, so I think those are the highlights for this year, and we'll see what happens next year.
Yes, and in January, on the 10th, you're going to do your predictions for 2017?
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
I'll break out my cloudy crystal ball, and we'll give this another shot.
See what happens. Hopefully it's going to be a good year for us,
quiet
not
year.
The bad guys.
Let's hope for a quiet year.
On this coming Monday, the 12th, we have our Hangout with IMT, and we'll be at the computer store. So you can come by and see Dante and I and shop the store. And I happen to know that there's going to be a very nice grand prize to be won, which is an iPad Air. We'll go to one lucky winner. And so watch for more information about that. But that's going to be Monday at 1 o'clock at the computer store. We'll probably be set up there in Heritage Court and having fun there. So excellent. We're looking forward to that. And who knows, there may be some extra prizes. We'll see how much money I can get out of Shawn.
Well, I won't take part in the raffle because, let's face it.
Yeah.
Results can vary when security guys get involved.
Very much so. So with that, we will wish you guys, everyone, a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you again in January on the 10th of January. That's the second Wednesday. Since we come back to work on the 2nd, I'll give you a break, and we'll start up on the 10th.
Yep.
Anything else, Shawn?
No. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of our viewers.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.